Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Before we get started, I have a question for you. Would 52 public speaking tips help you to become a more engaging, more confident, and more successful speaker? Then get your free tips at petergeorgepublicspeaking.com/tips. That's petergeorgepublicspeaking.com/tips. Now, to our episode. Improv is the art of saying yes and. But when it comes to thinking about it, so many of us say, no way. And that's unfortunate because no matter how well you plan, things will go wrong. Surprises will arise, and the universe will throw you a curveball. Consequently, your success and sanity are directly related to how you respond to these challenges. In this episode, Avish Parashar shows you how you can add more creativity and humor to your talks, ultimately helping you bring audience engagement to new heights. And of course, keeping you nimble so you can face those inevitable surprises that will arise when presenting. Avish performed all throughout high school, but decided to stop performing when he went to college to focus on his studies. His parents were so very proud. That resolve lasted only a few months, as the first time he saw an improv comedy show, he fell in love. His parents were slightly less proud. 1 week later, he auditioned for the campus improv group, got in, and the rest is history. Now, Avish focuses on the speaking and training side of the business, using improv comedy as a tool to teach valuable business skills, such as creativity, innovation, and adaptability. Avish is the author of Improvise to Success and the Amazon best-selling Say Yes and. And yes, his parents are once again very proud. Here's my chat with Avish Parashar. Hi, Avish. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We're going to discuss something that strikes fear into the hearts of many people, perhaps even more than public speaking, and that's improv. Hopefully we can dispel some of the myths and encourage people to take advantage of this powerful tool. So to begin with, can anyone perform improv, or is it something that people are just born with?
Yes, I have a firm belief that anyone can perform improv, and that is from 30 years of experience of teaching and training and studying improv. Really, for me, improv is more about a series of reflexes and kind of mindsets than necessarily skill or talent. And I think the people who we look at and say, oh, they're born or they're naturals, they just happen through their upbringing, their environment. They just develop those reflexes and mindsets. So for some people, it is a struggle and hard because, as I'm sure you've come across in your own teachings and business, that it's hard to get people to change how they think. So you have to change some of those default responses. Anyone can do it. For some people, it's a shorter process, and for others, it's a lot of work. But anyone can do it.
So what do you say to the people who are listening now and they're thinking, yeah, that's all well and good, but I'm not funny?
Well, here's the thing. I would challenge them on that. I would say you don't think you are traditionally funny, but I guarantee you, if you spend a minute, think about your life, there is some environment, some person who, when you get together with, you laugh, you make them laugh. You know, it may not be in front of 1,000 people on stage. It might be just your old college roommate and the two of you laugh your heads off together, right? Everyone's funny. They're just funny in their own way. And not everyone is taking the time to understand how to develop and channel that humor in a way that maybe has broader appeal or is appropriate for professional audiences. You know, there's a whole saying there that there's truth in comedy. And so comedy isn't necessarily about being wacky and coming up with the craziest things. It's about first just observing and finding those kernels of truth and then expanding on them from your own unique point of view.
Do you think some of us hold back where we might either be funny or interesting in a funny way, but when we get into the business side, that we mask that we don't feel like we should be funny?
Oh, absolutely. So in my, you have to cut me off at some point because this could be like a 30-minute piece right here. But, I do a lot of training on creativity and how to access creativity. And what I say is I've done improv for like 30 years and taught for most of that. I've never really taught someone how to be funny, which may make you wonder why you have me on your podcast. But all I've ever done is train people how to access their creativity that they normally block themselves from with these filters, that voice in your head, that every time you have a thought, start saying, is that appropriate? Are people going to like that? Should I say that? And so we always have those filters, and they're not inherently bad because they keep you employable and out of trouble, right? You can't just say the first thing that pops in your head. But in a business world, it's an even stronger filter, right? Like if you're just with your friends or family, there's less of a filter. And so the more filters you have, the more you are cut off from your creativity. Number one, the less funny you're able to be. And number two, the less creative and innovative you are at work.
Avish, some listeners will still be thinking, this is very interesting, but I'm never going to use improv in my presentation. Really, how will learning some improv help?
Well, there's really three ways. One is a little more specific for speakers, but so number one, the skills of improv, the main thing is improvising. So obviously we live in a unscripted world and we are constantly forced to deal with change, whether it's big change like say a global pandemic or a small change like our meeting time has been changed or you get an unexpected response in a conversation. So number one, your ability to improvise helps you respond to those changes where you don't get derailed, but rather can kind of keep moving forward. Number two, to do great improv, you have to learn how to, number one, be creative. Number two, communicate effectively with others. And I challenge you to come up with a business environment where your ability to think creatively or communicate more effectively is not helpful. And number three, and perhaps the most important one, especially for speakers, is when I talk about these filters, when you get really good or experienced with improv, when you're doing it right, it's this form of authentic expression, right? Because you're saying your own words, your own thoughts from deep inside of you, which is why a lot of us filter it. We're afraid of letting that out. But as you get better at it, the more authentic you are, certainly the better speaker you are, right? Because that's, if you've been around the Speakers Association or just speaker training, what audiences crave is authenticity. And it's so easy to spot a speaker who is trained to move their hand in a certain way or to make this gesture when they say this line, right? It's like they're doing a performance versus the authenticity of just expressing your own thoughts. And improv breaks down those barriers and just lets you be more comfortable being yourself, which I think is a valuable business tool, but especially a valuable speaking tool.
One of the points you just made was being creative. How can our listeners be more creative? Because a lot of them don't believe they are creative. How can we help them with that?
The first thing is to remember that creativity is a muscle and a habit. It's not a switch. So it's not about suddenly waking up tomorrow. I wish I could, I'd make a lot of money, but there's nothing I can do right now to have you wake up tomorrow and be creative. It's a process you have to build. So the primary thing anyone can do right now is to start reducing those filters. And the two best ways of doing that, number one, are to have what I call an empty mind. You want to practice quieting that voice in your head. The simplest and best way to do that is to practice just simple meditation. It doesn't even need to be spiritual or religious. Just practice sitting there and just focus on your breathing. And when thoughts pop up, just let them go. Now that seems like, what does that have to do with anything? Well, you have to quiet that critical voice. And by practicing that daily, you become much more able to do that. The second thing you can do right away is to practice going fast, right? Our creative ideas come from our subconscious, right? That's where all of our feelings, memories, random thoughts are. The conscious mind has the filter. It is possible, though, to generate ideas quickly enough that your filter doesn't have a chance to kick in. That's why not all, but a lot of improv, especially like Whose Line Is It Anyways in short form, it's very high energy and very fast because the performers are getting those ideas out before their mind can start editing. So the quickest exercise is something called morning pages that I read about from a woman named Julia Cameron, who wrote a book called The Artist's Way. First thing in the morning, before your mind has filled up, take 3 blank sheets of paper and just start writing. Now, what you write doesn't matter. When I'll do that, I will literally start writing sometimes saying, here I am again. I don't want to do this. It's too early. This is stupid. Doesn't matter. And eventually you'll run out of ideas to say. When that happens, the only rule is don't let the pen stop moving. And you will write, I don't know what else to write. What should I write next? And then an idea will pop in your head. And so what you're training yourself to do is to let ideas come out of your mind unfiltered. And what's really interesting is when you get to that third page, the first page or two is all top of mind. Here's what I have to do today. I had this meeting yesterday. When you keep going, you exhaust your conscious mind and you start accessing creative ideas. Random stuff will pop in your head, thoughts, things you hadn't thought about in years. And as a practice, you do this, and it gets easier and easier to shut that filter off and just let your creativity flow. And if I may take one more moment for immediate application, which I'm assuming is something your listeners probably like, you can do this same thing when it comes to work. If you ever write a report, an article, a presentation, and you're struggling, we all struggle with writer's block. Stop thinking. Just start writing, and don't let the keyboard stop or don't let the pen stop, and just write the article. Now, 80% of what you write might be garbage, but that 20% you write it'll get you past your writer's block, and it'll be creative, and then you can go back and edit. So that's my, as I said, this could be like a 30-minute segment on its own, but that's my kind of quick and dirty, how you can start immediately improving your creativity.
Now, I was once told that humor can be found just about anywhere. In our natural surroundings, can we find humor there as well?
Yes. And this is, look at Jerry Seinfeld. He didn't ever say anything brilliant. He just pointed out the stuff that every one of us saw but never noticed, if you will, right? Like, and referred to it. So there's natural humor in everything. And a good technique I'd recommend, and this is also not mine, but I'm happy to quote other people, is Judy Carter is a stand-up comedian, and she trained stand-up. She wrote a book called The Comedy Bible. And this has changed my approach to comedy very positively. Stop looking for funny things. Stop saying, what's funny about this? Instead, ask, what's hard about this? What's weird? What's scary? Or what's stupid? As the first step, right? And those are your observations. And then when you come up with those observations, then you free associate, like with that writing exercise, to expand on that idea, right? And that's all. Every comedian is different, but that's what, if you listen to a lot of comics closely, all their premises start with, what's weird about blank, or what's hard about this, or stupid. Now, they may not use those words exactly, but that's where it starts. So if you want to start finding the humor all around you, it's very tough to say what's funny. But, I started at the beginning talking about truth and comedy. Hard, stupid, scary, weird. That's the kernel of truth that you can then just flow with.
Avish, you talk about the use of emotional variance to make material more engaging and funnier. What is this, and how can our listeners achieve it?
So emotional variance is, we've all heard of vocal variety, and if you've done Toastmasters, it's a big thing, and not being monotonous. Well, one time I was listening to someone tell a story, and I was just bored out of my mind. And it wasn't a boring story, and he wasn't being monotonous. But then what I realized is the emotional level he had telling the entire story was the same. And that's when it clicked. We need to take our listeners or audience members as speakers on a journey. And we get so focused on the content. What am I saying? But one of the most powerful tools we have is emotion. So what we want to do is we don't want to take people on a content journey. We want to take them on an emotional journey. And if you think about any movie, that's what they do, right? They start with very little emotion, the heroes in their ordinary world, and then something happens that creates an emotion, fear, jealousy, love, whatever. Now, throughout the story, the emotion has to change. Oftentimes, it has to increase in intensity. And sometimes it just changes completely. So it's like, we went from fear to happy to angry. And this is what we need to help our audiences do. Now, the way we do that is not by telling them what to feel, and not by simply coming up with content, but rather by invoking that emotion in our voice. So if I'm telling a story to my audience about a time I was frustrated, what a speaker will say is, I walked into the store and no one was even paying attention to me. It made me so frustrated. What we want to do is we want to tell that story by letting the emotion in our voice when we tell it. So don't just say, I was frustrated. Say So I'm in the store, I'm looking and I need some help and everyone is ignoring me. And I got so frustrated. Now that simple little shift, and then the next line I say, I need to do one of two things. I need to either be more frustrated or I need to change the emotion to, I was so frustrated and I'm getting really annoyed. And I'm looking around and no one's, and then it was like Moses and the seas parted. This woman from across the store made eye contact with me and suddenly I felt seen. Now this, when you're in customer service, the simple act of acknowledging and seeing the customer and so on and so on, right? And that's the other thing is you can use the same principle when delivering content. It doesn't need to be a story. And I've done workshops before for speakers who are like engineers and they got to do a lot of numbers and test results. And I'm like, well, what do the numbers mean? Was it surprising? Was it expected? Was it good? Was it bad? And let that emotion into your voice. Like, oh, here we actually saw a 22% increase. That little bit of positivity. So an appropriate emotion in your voice is good storytelling, will engage the audience. When you exaggerate the emotion, that's when you can start to create humor. Like if you go over the top with it or an inappropriate emotion, right? That's how you surprise the audience and get them laughing.
When we go out on stage or in front of a group, we start concentrating on the material. Mm-hmm. Yet when we're home with a significant other or a friend or whomever it may be, those emotions come through naturally. Mm-hmm. And when we can translate what we do naturally to presenting in front of others is when it really connects with the audience.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. And one thing, when we talk about authenticity, one thing I say is picture yourself in the environment you're most comfortable with, that person, the family, whoever, and then picture yourself speaking on stage. How similar do those two people look? And for a lot of speakers, it's very different. The person they are when they're relaxed is very different than the person they are on stage. And to me, that's kind of the authenticity disconnect.
Do you think it's also the fear of being judged? We're not fearful of being judged by our significant other, friends, family, whoever it might be, where we are when we're presenting?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. It's just all these eyes on you and judging you. And, a simple thing to remember is, number one, audiences want you to do well. We get so afraid of the audience heckling us or bored or really the last thing an audience member wants is to not like the speaker. They want to like you. And yeah, we're just so afraid of, and I think that's another, going back to improv, that you're always putting yourself out there. You get much more comfortable with not worrying about being judged because you're always out there and doing it. So I think that is a great point.
Like you said, audiences want us to do well. I take people back to school. You went to your first day at a new class. No one, I can guarantee no one ever said, I hope for the next semester this professor is boring and sucks. Mm-hmm. You want them to be entertaining. You want them to be engaging. You want them to convey the messages in a way that you'll receive them. But we get so caught up in, what if they don't like me?
And what's interesting is that for not liking you, the two ways to be more likable are, number one, to be vulnerable. And so you have to open yourself up to judgment, and then people like you more, ironically. And the other is to fail, I would say, amicably. A way to connect with the audience is to not be perfect, rather, but to mess up a little bit. And not on purpose, but if you try something and it doesn't work and you're just honest about it, the audience is it endears you to them. But when you're so concerned about being so perfect and everything going right, then it creates a wall. You almost seem like a robot. It's weird. All the things we try to do to be less judged actually work against us.
When you talk about screwing up a little bit, I was asked to speak off the cuff, if you will, and it was in front of someone who is very high up in politics here in Rhode Island. And he was sitting 2 seats away from me. And he was probably the only person right around me that I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, when I got up, I could not put 2 sentences together. I fumbled over them. And at one point, I just turned to this gentleman and said, "Can you believe I speak for a living?" And very quietly, very matter-of-factly, he said, "No, I can't." Oh, gosh. And everybody started laughing, including me. And The people I knew came up to me afterwards and they were chuckling a little bit and they said, we weren't laughing at you. We were laughing with you. And I looked at them and said, no, you weren't. You were laughing at me. I was laughing at me. And that became a story.
Yeah.
And I think back of more than 30 years of speaking on stage and just life in general. Some of the most embarrassing moments, some of the biggest screw-ups as I might have thought of them at the time, became my best stories.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as a speaker in general, you almost want to tell more stories of times you messed up and what you learned from it than, it's kind of annoying listening to a speaker who does nothing but tell you about all the great things they've done. So yeah, go out and fail more. Like it'll be material, but we learn more through failure anyways than like we learn and grow through our failures, through trying things. And again, it's not about failing on purpose or intentionally being unprepared, but yeah, just having that good nature and it's funny. You mentioned that story. I sort of similar in my early days. It was one of the first like full fee at the time events I got. And I walked in, it was a group of building owners and managers. And I immediately psyched myself out because these are people with a lot more money than I had. And they talked about that last speaker was like Jerry Cooney, who was, former world heavyweight boxing champ. And I'm like, I don't even know how old I was at this point, but 30-year-old improv guy with like no background. And I just got so worked up in my head that I got so stressed out. And I did okay. I didn't bomb per se, but I didn't get any spin-off business and they didn't ask me back. And for that moment, I made just kind of a self-commitment, which is like, I'm just not going to care about the audience. Now, that sounds bad because I really do want them to learn and be entertained, but that's more about prep. When you get on stage, they're going to like you or they're going to hate you. You're going to do well or you're going to shine, and it doesn't matter at that point. And the more you can embrace that, like, hey, whatever happens, happens, things got a lot better from that point. Like I've still gone in stressed and still a little worried, but it's never been quite that bad. And, just realize that, hey, no matter what's going to happen is going to happen. Just go do your best, have fun, and move on.
When I hear about improv, I hear the term yes and.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about yes and.
So yes and is one of the first things you learn in improv. It's very simple. It's just that in improv or in life, every time you're presented with an offer, which is what we call improv, when someone says or does something, they offer you their input. You can say yes, but, or yes, and. And for a lot of people, the default, whether it's on stage in improv or in life, is to say yes, but, to anything that's not in their original plan or what they wanted. And in improv, you're taught to say yes, and. And what that does is the yes is I kind of accept your offer, like I acknowledge what you're saying, and I'm going to add on it. I'm going to build on it. And this, it's hard to do because in order to do that, you have to let go of your preconceived ideas. So for example, if you and I were doing an improv scene together and the suggestion was like, we're in a bathroom. And in my mind, for whatever reason, I'm thinking that, we're on the bathroom in like a nuclear submarine. And you just come in and say, oh, we got to like hurry up and get this bathroom clean before the concert lets out. And my yes, but would be like, yeah, but why is there a concert on our nuclear submarine? Right? Which makes no sense. What I'm saying is, here's my idea, and I'm going to block yours to get mine out. But the yes and would be, I would let go of my nuclear submarine idea, say, yes, and I know this is free beer night at the concert, so this bathroom's going to be overrun if we don't, we got to get this done right away. So what I'm doing is I've accepted your offer that we're cleaning the bathrooms for a concert, and I've added to it. I've upped the stakes by saying, oh, they're giving away free beer, so obviously this bathroom's going to get a lot of use. Off stage, it becomes this amazing communication principle. It's like whatever you say, instead of me trying to yes, but you and get you my point of view, I'm going to start from your place and build off of that first. It's a one-word shift, but to and, but it makes a difference in almost every communication application you can have.
And that's a great lesson in life, too.
It is. And, if we're all Stephen Covey people, right, there's the seek first to understand, then to be understood, from 7 Habits. To me, yes, but versus yes, and just is an easy way of remembering that. If I'm saying yes, but what I'm saying, yes, but I want you to understand me. When I say yes, and I'm saying yes, and let me understand your position.
And it's not always the case, but yes seems to be positive and but often seems to be negative.
Oh, yeah. Well, whenever someone says but, what they're saying is we're going to ignore everything I just said. Like, oh, you are such a good speaker. Everyone on the committee loved you. But like they're not going to say, but we'd like to pay you double your fee, right? They're going to say, but we went with this other speaker. And so, yeah, but is just a way of saying, yeah, I just buttered you up with what I just said, but I'm not really going to say something nice to you.
Now, for our listeners, how can they get started in improv? Can they get a business associate, a friend, and just start practicing with the yes and, or is there a better way to go about it?
You can just start practicing. Obviously, in the world we live in, you can go on YouTube and Google and find kind of intro stuff and videos. And I have some videos as well and things like that. And I do a virtual class once in a while. I don't have one coming up right now. Finding a class or a group is probably a better first step. With improv, having someone who knows a little bit about what they're doing to observe and give feedback is super helpful. If you don't have that, you might be able to figure it out, but you could also potentially be ingraining bad habits. So almost every city, town has an improv group. Many of them offer classes. I mean, people often ask me after my presentations, like, oh, should I take an improv class? I'm like, yeah, of course you should. And even if it turns out not to be practical, it's just a lot of fun, right? You laugh, you be creative. So just, Google your area and for improv groups and, go check them out. I would say if you go to watch them and you're not entertained by their show, maybe don't take their class. But if you like what they're doing, take an intro class, start learning the basics. And almost everyone I know who's taken an intro improv class has loved it. Just, if nothing else, because it's just a ton of fun. So I'd highly recommend starting out that way.
And for our listeners who are still nervous about that idea, I would think getting a friend who would like to learn it as well and going together would make it a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, it depends on the personality. For some people, I think for a lot of people, having a friend would help a lot. Like for me, that would help if I was nervous about something. For others, because you're going to be silly, having someone there might make you more self-conscious. So, just figure out your own kind of motivational style and make sure you're taking the right person with you. Because you don't want someone who's you're going to feel, like you said, judged. You don't want, oh man, what is Steve going to say if I act silly in this scene? So, get the right friend. Or if you're better off going alone, just kind of figure out your strategy. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, having a friend or someone is a great way to go.
Avish, this has been incredibly interesting. Where can our listeners learn more about you, your services, and implementing improv?
My business website is avishparashar.com. That's my full name, AVISHPARASHAR.com. Most of my business is doing keynote presentations for conferences and groups, some trainings on dealing with change. And on the website, there's information, there's blog posts, there's lots of video clips and links to like my YouTube channel. So that's the business one. And if you're interested in just kind of observing improv comedy, I'm launching a new podcast. I'm not sure when this episode is going live, but the pre-launch is up. If you go to avishandmike.com, AVISHANDMIKE.com, it is a podcast where we use short form improv games to weave together a long form story. So we tell like 4 or 5 improv games, but they're all related, like one long story. And each one is an homage to a style of movie. So we did like a fantasy movie. We've got a summer camp movie. We've got a thriller. We've got slasher movie, but it's the same characters like continuously and same story that's continued through the improv games. It's a ton of fun. It's a great way to kind of check out some improv comedy as an observer if you're interested too.
Can't wait to listen to it. Avish, thanks for being here today. It's been a lot of fun, and I'd like you to come back someday and expound upon this even more.
Fantastic. I would love to. You could probably tell I could talk about this stuff all day, so I would love to.
Hey there. This is a reminder to sign up for your 52 free tips at petergeorgepublicspeaking.com/tips. petergeorgepublicspeaking.com/tips.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.